I think that the manhood crisis is in part created by the third wave of feminism in particular, and the way that feminists and women lost uh, focus. So, and I think that there is a feminist fix to the crisis in manhood, um, a way to set men free from patriarchy. And I call it men's lib. I think it's time for the liberation of men from the procreative debt, let's call it. The things that the old system used and uses to keep men trapped. So I don't believe that men will turn to savages if they're set free from the bondage of being the provider. And in fact, I think they'll become better fathers and better, more honest lovers, partners, daters. Mm, I don't think that they will become worse rapists and and assaulters. I've spent my life expecting uh, to get attacked pretty much every night when it's dark and I'm out alone. I don't think that that will in any way get worse if men don't feel trapped and pushed against the corner, if they feel happier, if they can find themselves, if they can feel more authentic. So the wages of manhood in patriarchy were attached to so-called family, which is really procreation and romance. Um, I think that with the end of patriarchy, that also has to end. And as woman has attained the ability to earn wages and work in society, um, and make her own money and have her own property and have her own bank accounts and pretty much do the equivalent of what men were able to do throughout patriarchy, there is no more need to hold men morally bound to these responsibilities that were particularly a result of patriarchy, of patrilineage, of the exclusionary rights accorded to men. So it would be nice for men, the masculine, to save us from the technology that it got us into, to kind of like, be able to take a conscious break from this relentless quest for profit, for generational control, for domination, which again is a way to mitigate the trauma of the end of patriarchy, of the collapse of patriarchy, which men experience very intensely. Um, yeah, from the beginning of the change, let's say, which happened sometime in the 1970s, so it's very recent. Men have relentlessly looked for ways to kind of like maintain the some sort of cultural monopoly. And when I say men, I don't mean the male gender. I mean everyone who does not procreate. It could be women, it could be trans people. The social gender identification is irrelevant here. Um, it's mostly who the people who create structure, who work, who sustain the culture, um, who do not go, who work on function on 24-hour rather than monthly cycles, and so on and so forth. And now with the medicalization of biology, again, gender is irrelevant. This could be anybody who chooses to live as if they were a man in the 17th century. Meaning, the way that men were biologically before the medical and reproductive developments. that brought us here. So we are very slowly evolving, but we're not. We feel like we're evolving, but in fact, it seems that we're running around in circles, and that's because we haven't found a way to take our new knowledge and bring it back into our nature and recenter ourselves and understand who we are, and also demonetize our love lives and our family lives, which is the way to kind of like recenter, because for all the millions of years we lived close to nature. That happened pretty much by necessity. So we were very close to our rhythms, our natural rhythms, and our place on the planet. And that has changed with industrialization, urbanization, digitalization, medicalization, all of that. So men in particular were turned into working machines, often for life. And what's at stake here? What's pretty much, unspoken is how the collapse of the patriarchy can actually resolve our codependency and our resentments of each other, and allow us to enter into a more balanced coexistence. So instead, many of us, particularly the men, feel this collapse as some sort of profound existential loss. Yeah. So we need to unpack our mass addiction to the paradigm of patriarchy, and begin to understand the new freedoms, and also understand that you cannot bring down the master using the tools of the master, right? So we can rebirth ourselves using the tools of the past. We have to sacrifice a great deal of familiar comfort and safety in order to rebirth ourselves. So for that, we need faith. Luckily, it seems to me that faith in our nature is pretty easy. So yeah, we need to create like the Underground Railroad for men, men of means, men of all sorts who feel exploited by young women, by women they're married to, by their families, by their jobs, because love is not slavery, and it should not be transactional. So in order to understand really what freedom is, we have to understand the enslavement of people who become pregnant, basically. And once we can stop that, we will be able to liberate men from this whole kind of like self-judgment, competition, that happens through the intermediary of money. So that money is the representation of love rather than the actual thing, of trust, of loyalty, of commitment. And I do think that, fragile manhood is a really kind of judgy, awkward way to speak of this sense of loss. Because culture nowadays has no stability anymore. So we are supposed to be the stability for each other, the anchor, right? The lighthouse in the dark. and man had this idea of himself as the stable one, the structure, the center, around which, the provider, but it was really women who create community, who create certainty through birth. That's what kind of like keeps us all centered somewhere and focused, is this kind of like focus on the future that's represented by the next generation. So the collapse of the patriarchy has led to a mass loss of faith in our social contract, which shapes relations between people, between governments, between nations, and the boundaries of each community and state. So the major world powers are still kind of like the same old territorial behemoths: America, China, Russia, Europe, based on continents. And they have access to like terrifying nuclear arsenals each, which is the huge change that happened basically since World War II. And there has been a fundamental rethinking as a result. It was necessitated by the collapse of the post-Cold War order, right, which happened in response to unprecedented developments in science, in lifestyle. So the New World Order that H.W. Bush announced in 1990, which Bill Clinton upheld with his obsessive, like greedy push for, globalization, pressuring, capitalism to become internationalism. It has been trampling over and slowly obliterating the pre-existing conditions of patriarchy, of inheritance, of legacy, of what I called earlier the social contract, which was founded on this, let's say, inherited principles of common language, common religion, common customs, which were kind of like enforced on each newborn person by the family. And what kept this family together was precisely that, right? The inheritance of name, of meaning, of way of life, of property, the repetition. So the market-centric changes that were meant to lead to global prosperity and peace collapsed by the year 2000, Y2K, and the dot-com crashes and the shock of 9/11, and then especially the financial crisis of 2008, that Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, and the neoliberal policies, which, like lower taxation, career, flexibility, constant change, privatization of public sector services, enhanced censorship, extreme government surveillance, and of course the legalization of the corporate purchase of our political representatives. The decision by the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court that corporations are actually citizens. So all of this has further galvanized the popular anger. I mean, I'm angry. And, there are always protests, protests around the world. What these protests lack is a clear understanding of what the problem is, of the common complaint, of what we want, how we want to move forward out of this sense of mess and chaos, which is the result of the collapse of patriarchy, or of civilization as we used to know it. So the different protests, demand that the governments respect the basic rights of citizens, or, give some, assure some sort of equity or equality, or address the growing gap between haves and have-nots, between gender, race, age, religion, birthright, and all of that. But basically, what we citizens have found out is every turn, at every turn, the powers that be can take advantage of our micro requests and seem to address them in ways that further divide us and further set us against one another, rather than against the overall system. So the modern governments are not serving the majority of their populations. That much is made clear. They are serving the super wealthy, the monopolies, untaxed corporations, and the non-profits that they spawn, and the policies that they support. And it doesn't matter which. It could be that they serve climate change, because they're going to make the green energy sources of energy, and that will make them profit. So it really doesn't matter. There is no good and bad. There is no non-profit and therefore it's good. That all has disappeared. Basically, the only thing that I would say is bad is this extreme hierarchy, the pyramid shape. And that's what the powers that be want to preserve at all costs. So they don't care if the people at the top of the pyramid are a racial minority, or a gender minority, or a religious minority, or anything like that. It doesn't really matter who gets to be at the very top, so long as that system of extreme inequality and domination is perpetuated, which forces us to fight against each other and compete against each other, because the positions in life that are worth having are so few that we will go at it for the entirety of our lives, trying to get to the top, to be among the handful of people, families, because these people then get married and have children, who make it to the top. Now, the irony of this is that in post-patriarchy, after the end of royal families and the stability afforded by agrarian patriarchies, the top placement is no longer guaranteed past one's lifetime. That's why I think that one way to change everything fundamentally is to undo inheritance, our idea of generational wealth. If everyone, to begin with, as a first change, if everyone participated in this extreme competition, but could not leave more than $1 million or $2 million or $5 million to their heirs, and everything else would return to the state, not to their stupid non-profits, not to the many tax scams, but to the people, then this money-making insanity would slowly show itself for the silly game that it is. And those who are good at making money could engage in it and make that money, but it would not be all and end all, because really it wouldn't make a huge difference to their descendants. And the fact is that it does not make a huge difference to their descendants, because most of the time they marry ill-chosen partners whom they choose for their looks, or as arm candy, or some sort of trophy, or for their inheritance, or whatnot. And by the second or third generation, the wealth has been diluted, dispersed, wasted, lost, and their grandchildren or great-grandchildren are all drug addicts or taken advantage of or incapable of, lack most skills of survival. So that's the way it's sustained right now. So anyway, the system is pretty broken, meaning no matter how hard you work, after you die, there is no guarantee that the people who inherit you will hold on to this hard-earned wealth for more than a generation max. So once we understand that our control does not extend past our lifetimes, then we can begin to understand that our struggle for domination does not really last past our lifetimes, and accumulating wealth past our lifetimes is a waste of our resources unless we like to do it as a game, as I said. So if that would bring much more money voluntarily turned into the Commonwealth, and at the same time the Commonwealth, the government, should be shrunk. So the huge, fat administrative state could be pretty much eliminated. So government could be truly representative and changed often. My theory is that we shouldn't even have a president have 2 consecutive terms. I think if we have a president who is elected twice, he should take a break and not be able to run 2 turns in a row. So the first term is not spent trying to win a vote for the second term. And I definitely think that those octogenarian and nonagenarian members of the Senate should not be allowed to run consecutively so often, and the same goes for Congress. People should be changed. So the Senate, every term, every 6 years, you can't run again for a second term. The Congress, you have to wait a term. So you can go back 6 years later. And the Congress, something comparable. Now you can be like a 2-term congressman or a 3-term congressman, and then you take a break for 3 terms. And then you can run again. And I think the same should happen with administration positions. Someone cannot work their entire career controlling or working for a huge government agency, especially places like the FBI, the CIA, and all of that. I really think that change is what we need to believe in, because that's where we are anyway. We're at a time where change is really fast. In the agrarian patriarchal era, which started from the first settlements, agrarian-based settlements in 10,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 BC in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in Greece, and so on and so forth, until sometime after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, as mass migration toward the cities and urbanization became pretty prevalent and global, and slowly changed vast nations like Russia, China. At that stage, and especially with the digital revolution, which made the industrialization even faster, at that stage, we no longer have been able to be actually stable. We kid ourselves thinking that we're a stable society, but we're not. I come from the cradle of civilization, and my people are at the crossroads of the Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman, Middle East, the dawn of history, basically, where the first deciphered writing has been found. And history proves that given enough pressure, social pressure, the lid will pop off, the pot, the boiling pot. the social, the social kind of container will pop open, and there will be revelation. which is a form of real revolution. Now we call everything a revolution. But true revelation, as in the time of Christ, Christ was revelatory or revolutionary. That's why the clock went back to 0. Since 10,000 years ago, we began the age of trade, right? With the town of Jericho, and that trade, as we became stable, trade became much more organized, and with that, human knowledge became much more organized, and also became evolved more quickly because there was the input of many more of us. And like from the War of Troy, around 1200 BC, and then by 600 BC, the Indo-European marauders who populated North Europe, North Africa, right, the Middle East, and they brought their patriarchal language and aesthetics and constitutional order, so to speak. From then until now, until 1940s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, we were more or less consistent. And we came to assume that civilization is continuity. The same way that the religious can count on heaven to exempt us from the effects of the changeability in human nature, of human life, right? But I do think that we're at a time where we must embrace change. The new has been altering the old way too fast, and change currently presides over all things mortal. My Instagram handle, motto has been Pandarine, everything flows. Since I started my Instagram account in like 2011 or 12, everything flows really fast. So working really hard to attain a goal, maybe a form of delusion, because whatever we attain will be changed really fast, and then we need a new goal, right? So this kind of like snake eating its tail, right? It's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy going on, something that we should note. Is we think we're going forward, but we're not. We're just going in spiral, in circles. Tighter and tighter circles. At the end of it, of course, is death. Plato called the transformations, the reformations, the evolutions of human affairs metaboly, a turn. Polybius called them anacycloses, right? Recycling. The recurring cycle in human affairs.